Current Affairs.
This is Akashvani. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit. The participants are Veena Sikri, former diplomat, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, defense analyst, and Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, international affairs expert. Moderator is Tina Jha, journalist.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin held wide-ranging talks at the Hyderabad House in New Delhi during the 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit. The discussions reflected the depth and dynamism of a bilateral relationship that is not only historic but strategically indispensable for both the countries. Listen in to what the Prime Minister said about President Putin's visit.
आज भारत और रूस के 23वें शिखर सम्मेलन में राष्ट्रपति पुतिन का स्वागत करते हुए मुझे बहुत खुशी हो रही है। उनकी यात्रा ऐसे समय हो रही है जब हमारे द्विपक्षीय संबंध कई ऐतिहासिक माइलस्टोन के दौर से गुजर रहे हैं। ठीक 25 वर्ष पहले राष्ट्रपति पुतिन ने हमारी स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की नींव रखी थी। 15 वर्ष पहले 2010 में हमारी साझेदारी को स्पेशल एंड प्रिविलेज स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप का दर्जा मिला। पिछले 2.5 दशक से उन्होंने अपने नेतृत्व और दूरदृष्टि से इन संबंधों को निरंतर सींचा है। हर परिस्थिति में उनके नेतृत्व ने आपसी संबंधों को नई ऊंचाई दी है। भारत के प्रति इस गहरी मित्रता और अटूट प्रतिबद्धता के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति पुतिन का, मेरे मित्र का हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूं।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin held wide-ranging talks at the Hyderabad House in New Delhi during the 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit. The discussions reflected the depth and dynamism of a bilateral relationship that is not just historic but strategically indispensable for both the countries. Reaffirming their mutual commitment to further strengthen the special and privileged strategic partnership, the two leaders reviewed the full spectrum of cooperation from defense, trade and economic ties to energy, science and technology and also cultural linkages. They also exchanged perspectives on key regional and global developments of mutual interest. During the summit, both leaders witnessed the exchange of several important documents and MOUs spanning trade and commerce, migration and mobility, maritime cooperation, health and food safety, fertilizers, academic exchanges, media collaboration, and initiatives to enhance people-to-people ties, marking yet another leap towards widening and deepening this partnership. So how will these new agreements influence sectors like commerce, mobility, maritime connectivity, and academia? Most importantly, where do the two countries see their partnership heading into the next decade? These are some important aspects that we will discuss on the program today. 3 eminent guests who are joining us in the program. Ambassador Veena Sikri, former diplomat. Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain, retired. He's a defense expert. Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, Center for European Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He's an international affairs expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this telecast on Akashvani. Welcome to the program. Ambassador, the first question to you. As someone who's seen the evolution of India-Russia ties evolve over the decades, tell us about what stands out as the most important takeaway from this summit for you.
Thank you very much for inviting me for your program. I think that President Putin has been very successful, significant visit. And I say the significance of the visit is for several reasons. There are many people who tend to see this visit only in terms of the short term, that there is this geopolitical volatility and fragility. And that's why, President Putin's visit is important, because India is looking to do things with Russia at this time. But I put the importance and significance of President Putin's visit in a much longer term context. We must remember that since President Putin joined, he's been there for a quarter of a century, 25 years, and we now have a unique situation with Russia that there are bilateral annual summit meetings between the President of Russia and Prime Minister of India. And this has been going on for 25 years. It is now the 26th year, and 23 such summits have been held in these years. You can see that the India-Russia relationship is a very strong pillar of India's foreign policy based on strategic autonomy. We developed develop our bilateral relations with different groups and individual countries and groups of countries, whether it is USA, UK, European Union, Japan, China, and so on, based on the bilateral mutual benefit with that particular country or group of countries. Our foreign policy is not a zero-sum game. It is not that if we develop relationships with Russia, it is going to be at the expense of any other country, not at all. So that is why the visit of President Putin has been very significant, because the decisions taken have been very important and will have strong impacts on India's continuing growth and prosperity. Let me focus first on the trade aspects. I think the trade aspect of the relationship is very significant because the leaders of both our countries have agreed already last year to a trade target of $100 billion bilateral trade by 2030. But India's exports in this target, which is now already reached 70 billion almost, India's exports are very small, just about $5 billion. So it's very important to increase India's exports to Russia, to give India access to the Russian market, which is a very sophisticated and large market. So whether it is seafood, IT products, or pharmaceuticals, or ready-made garments, agricultural products, engineering goods, all these discussions had been held on how the access can be given and what will be the modalities for this. Our Prime Minister has spoken very strongly on this at the Joint Business Forum. At the same time, there's also the decision on labor mobility, on our very skilled individuals from India going to Russia, being allowed to work there, live there for a long term. Now, once all this is done, the Russian demand for labor for India, I think the trade discussions have been very significant because this has a very important impact on people-to-people relations, business-to-business relations, and Russia-India partnership relationship is really must go beyond the government-to-government and go into the business-to-business and people-to-people relationship as well, because before 1991, before the breakup of the Soviet Union, the relationship between India and the then Soviet Union was very dynamic and very strongly based on people-to-people relationship. But after 1991, this aspect became weaker, and that's why now it's very important to revive it. The second aspect on which bilateral talks have taken place is on defense cooperation. And I think here it is very significant because we all know that India's success in Operation Sindoor has really rested on two important aspects where the cooperation with Russia has played a very large role. One is the BrahMos missile, which is developed jointly by India and Russia, and the second is the S-400 air defense system. So on these aspects, there's been further discussion, getting more of the S-400 to complete the contract already signed earlier, maybe going into the S-500, which is a more advanced air defense system. We have signed a logistics agreement with Russia, and the Russian parliament has already ratified this, and through this we will have a great significance of the joint cooperation between Indian Defence Forces and Russian Defence Forces, even going up to cooperation in the Arctic region, which is very important for India, both in terms of trade routes and in terms of resources. The agreements on this are going to be significant. On the aircraft, the Sukhoi 57 stealth aircraft jet fighter developed by Russia, they are interested in transfer of technology and selling it to India. So this too would have been discussed. They're very important aspects that India is continuing its defence cooperation in a very significant way with Moscow, and we hope to see strong outcomes on this. Then on the energy sector, India has been buying substantial amounts of Russian energy, oil and oil products, and President Putin has spoken himself about continuing this energy cooperation. We do know that there was pressure from America on stopping the purchases of oil and also American sanctions on the largest Russian oil companies. But despite that, India and Russia are discussing how the energy cooperation can continue.
Listen in to what the Prime Minister said.
ऊर्जा सुरक्षा भारत रूस साझेदारी का मजबूत और महत्वपूर्ण स्तंभ रहा है। सिविल न्यूक्लियर एनर्जी के क्षेत्र में हमारा दशकों पुराना सहयोग क्लीन एनर्जी की हमारी साझा प्राथमिकताओं को सार्थक बनाने में महत्वपूर्ण रहा है। हम इस विन विन सहयोग को जारी रखेंगे। क्रिटिकल मिनरल्स में हमारा सहयोग पूरे विश्व में सिक्योर और डाइवर्सिफाइड सप्लाई चेन सुनिश्चित करने के लिए महत्वपूर्ण है। इससे क्लीन एनर्जी, हाईटेक मैन्युफैक्चरिंग और न्यू एज इंडस्ट्रीज में हमारी साझेदारी को ठोस समर्थन मिलेगा।
These are very important aspects of the energy cooperation that has been discussed between India and Russia. And certainly the question of the Ukraine-Russia conflict and the Trump 28-point peace plan that President Trump has given to Russia, and the discussions are continuing between Russia and America on this. And I think President Putin would have discussed in detail with our Prime Minister, because he has great regard and respect for our Prime Minister's role in bringing all sides together. Our Prime Minister has spoken strongly about dialogue and diplomacy, and in this context President Zelensky has been in touch with our Prime Minister, and of course President Putin is in regular contact with our Prime Minister as well. So certainly even on this question of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, this would have been discussed. So I do see that the outcome of President Putin's visit to India is very significant.
Professor, let's now get you into the discussion. We've seen how the summit has seen agreements spanning across trade, mobility, maritime linkages, also people-to-people ties. From an economic and developmental lens, how do you interpret this breadth of the cooperation between India and Russia?
Well, thank you for having me. And, you're right. In fact, there is a, legacy, there is a strong history when we look at India-Russia relations. When we had Indo-Soviet partnership, one of the very important pillar of that partnership was also very close trade and economic special partnership between India and the Soviet Union. In fact, when Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, Soviet Union was our major trading partner, in fact, maybe number one trading partner at that point of time. Since then, things have changed drastically. We have been discussing about improving our trade and economic relationship, but it was not really working. In fact, for the last so many years, our trade was somewhere stuck around $8 to $10 billion. Now, interestingly, in the last 3-4 years, as a result of Ukraine war, when Europe decided to move away from Russia continued to be a major producer and exporter of energy. So they started providing discounted crude to countries which could buy, and India, along with some other countries, was also a very important beneficiary of this. So as a result of this, at one point of time, 38-39% of our crude was coming from Russia. And now we have about 70 billion trade, and it can easily go up to 100 billion. But there are difficulties. Already there are certain pressures. United States has already put 25% tariff extra because we are buying oil from Russia. So now situation is dynamic, but this has actually new boost to India's relations with Russia, because this was the one pillar, which was relatively weak because our strategic, political and military ties were pretty strong. And even the energy sector, our companies had invested quite a lot in the Russian sector, from Sakhalin-1 to many other projects. So now the real challenge before policy makers, how to really sustain this particular leg of our relationship, because this is very important, not just only for trade and economics, but also for all our connectivity projects. For years we have been talking about international North-South trade corridor, Chennai-Vladivostok corridor.
Let's listen into what the Prime Minister said on this aspect.
दोनों देशों के बीच कनेक्टिविटी बढ़ाना हमारी मुख्य प्राथमिकता है। हम INSTC नॉर्दर्न सी रूट, चेन्नई व्लादिवोस्टोक कॉरिडोर पर नई ऊर्जा के साथ आगे बढ़ेंगे। मुझे खुशी है कि अब हम भारत के सी फेरर्स की पोलर वाटर्स में ट्रेनिंग के लिए सहयोग करेंगे। यह आर्कटिक में हमारे सहयोग को नई ताकत तो देगा ही, साथ ही इससे भारत के युवाओं के लिए रोजगार के नए अवसर बनेंगे। उसी प्रकार से शिप बिल्डिंग में हमारा गहरा सहयोग मेक इन इंडिया को सशक्त बनाने का सामर्थ्य रखता है। ये हमारे विन विन सहयोग का एक और उत्तम उदाहरण है।
And also other corridors, but because the volume of trade was relatively low, so many of these projects didn't take off. So now there's a possibility that if volumes continue, many of these projects could also become economically viable. Another problem has been then how do you really make payments to Russia, because Russia has been cut off from SWIFT. But policymakers from both the countries, because we also had earlier history, working through rupee-ruble trade, so they have been able to work out mechanism through which we have been able to pay to Russia in some local currencies, our currencies or other BRICS currencies. I think there is a new challenge, but I think both the countries are quite determined that it will continue. Of course, there must be some disturbances, some changes, because a large part of the the processed crude oil by some of our private companies were being sold to European markets.
Right.
Now from next year, Europe has decided not to buy Russian processed oil from other countries. So they have to look for other markets, or in fact we may have to divert some of that energy resources to the Indian market. But I think if there's a will from both countries, there's a possibility that it may not be at the same level, but India will continue to buy significant amount of oil from Russia. So this is how, in fact, it's a new dynamic, but I think this is really very important for bilateral relations.
Absolutely. A new dimension in the India-Russia partnership coming in at a time when we are celebrating a significant milestone, 25 years of strategic partnership that happened also under President Putin's helm. And now, of course, he's here for the 23rd India-Russia annual summit. It's come after a gap of 4 years, but all eyes, given the geopolitical complexities, have been on this particular visit and the kind of diversification in trade in terms of unlocking the immense potential that both leaders have spoken about at the joint summit. We will discuss in due course of the program how the imbalance of trade is also something that both leaders have agreed to touch upon, and how will this happen in due course of time. But one question, particularly on the defense aspect, General Hasnain, from you. Defense is one area, and in fact, cooperation in this area has historically been the bedrock of India-Russia relations over decades. What do today's discussions, announcements signal about the future military and strategic cooperation? I ask you because this is something that will always be the bedrock and the most important pillar of India-Russia relationship. Even if we diversify in other sectors, defense and energy will always remain most crucial in our relationship.
As far as the defense sector is concerned, is the strategic angle definitely. It's not just a political visit that is taking place at the moment. It's a consolidation, I would say, of India-Russia economics, energy security, defense sustainment, and the post-Ukraine positioning. So when we look at the defense sector, it's not just a question of equipment. It is a question of comprehensive security that we are looking at from a geopolitical angle too. I think this visit is sending some tremendous messages. First of all, the confidence with which Mr. Putin has come here. Secondly, it seems that the 29-point program, which is being looked at very seriously to end the Ukraine war, seems to have made a dent somewhere. And obviously, Mr. Putin is much more confident today of handling Ukraine and probably bringing this 4.5 year war to end finally. If that happens, obviously it's going to be a great boost to Indo-Russian relations. Our traditional strength has been in the defense sector. Right from the 50s, we have our orientation of equipment has generally been of the Soviet pattern. And much that we tried perhaps in the last 15 years or so to try and divest some of it and perhaps look for some other equipment around the world, Atmanirbharta included as far as our self-containment is concerned, we have not been able to do too much of diversification, and we still have 60 to 70% of our military equipment still of the Russian family, the Russian origin. And so therefore, despite the sanctions and everything, this seems to have withstood the pressures. I think one of the most important things was the S-400 deal, the 39,000 crore rupee deal which took place almost 10 years ago. And most of the equipment has come in. There is still some more to come. But the S-400 withstood the test of times during Operation Sindoor, as probably everyone knows it too. Now we are looking at, with the stabilization of the situation, we are hoping there will be also an improvement in Indo-US relations, an easing of sanctions perhaps, and some of the issues which had become rather acidic between India, the United States and Russia perhaps being shelved, and to that extent our ability to reach out to the Russians and take in more equipment from them will continue, although our diversification efforts are also continuing at the same time. There are more of S-400 air defense systems, T-90 tanks. We're looking at the Su-57 ultimately. The next generation aircraft as such, already Su-30s have made a major mark in our inventory, and that is where the Air Force is also looking at. The greatest success, BrahMos, the missile joint production, and everything that we are looking at today. I think what India is essentially doing is looking at assured availability of spare parts, of supply chains, ensuring that despite sanctions or anything which comes in, there is this particular route as far as the defense sector is concerned, which is always open to us.
One of the key announcements today to jointly manufacture more spare parts, components, defense equipment of Russian origin in India under the Make in India program. Let's listen into what the President Putin said on this aspect.
Our country, for the last half a century, has been helping to arm and modernize the Indian army, including the air defense forces, aviation, and the navy. In general, we are undoubtedly satisfied with the results of the negotiation we just had. Ahead of us, we have the meeting with the President of India, but even now, I can express my confidence that the current visit and the agreements reached will help the further deepening of the Russian-Indian strategic partnership for the benefit of our countries and the peoples of India and Russia.
So that's quite significant. The joint manufacturing of spare parts and components is being prioritized by both sides. But beyond meeting the operational needs of the Indian Armed Forces, it also envisions exporting jointly produced defense equipment to mutually friendly third countries. How do you interpret this move in the larger strategic and geopolitical context? Because this is helping not just India, but also some of the mutually friendly third world countries who can now buy jointly produced military equipment by India and Russia.
Well, that's a part of our commitment to the global south also, and our joint production with Russia will ensure the availability of most of this equipment, and this is all high quality equipment of current generations. Assured supply chains is the most important aspect. It's completely in sync with India's concept of Atmanirbharta, which is self-design, self-containment, self-development, and definitely this announcement now, it only reinforces our commitment to ensure that we are looking at greater manufacturing capabilities within the country and subsequently exports too.
I think that's quite important. We'll discuss further on how not just benefits India but also Russia in so many ways. Professor Sachdeva, I'll try and come back to the joint statement and particularly on the energy partnership, which is another crucial pillar of the India-Russia joint cooperation. There's been a pledge from the Russian president that despite the sanctions, despite the tariffs on India, this is going to continue. The energy partnership will continue because it helps India in its development, and especially given the huge demand given India's population. So that has been quite crucial. How do you note the importance of the expeditious resolution of issues related to some of the investment projects that have also seen various concerns being faced by investors in the energy sector? That is something that has not been spoken about, but each time there is talk of energy partnership, the concerns of the investors in this area is something that is flagged.
The fossil fuel and also the nuclear energy has been really very strong pillar of India-Russia partnership. Despite all the problems some companies might face, but Indian companies have invested so far close to 20 billion in the Russian market. And in fact, I'm reading that even ONGC Videsh might increase their share in Sakhalin-1 further. Similarly, now this is what, as I was mentioning earlier, India also has a huge refining capacity. Some of our private companies, one of the biggest in the world. In fact, if you look at our exports now, very significant exports are petroleum products. This particular visit is positioning India-Russia relations in the post-Ukraine war kind of situation. It may take a couple of weeks, couple of months. We don't know how things are going to end, but things will end. Then there's the ease of sanctions. Americans themselves, they are looking for more businesses in Russia. And since, we have already worked out so many things in the energy sector, and energy security, of course, is very important part because all our ambitions of 2047 of Viksit Bharat will continue to have very much big reliance on the fossil fuel despite our own ambitions about renewables. So within that, so far our companies were only investing in Russia because, geographically it was far away, so we were buying more from the Middle East. But now suddenly this diversification had taken place and the new channels have started, and that, as I was mentioning, may also help many of our connectivity projects. At the moment there are difficulties of sanctions, of payments, etc. But both the governments they have shown that they are determined to continue. There is, I think, political will in both the countries to move forward. So there is plenty of scope for India and Russia to work in the energy, all kind of energy. And this is what I think has come out very clearly during this summit.
Clearly, several sectors that will define going forth the economic trajectory of the India-Russia relationship in the years to come. 25 years of strategic partnership is what makes this visit of President Putin quite significant. After the joint statement today lays out a roadmap that both Prime Minister Modi and President Putin strongly underscored the need to combat terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Let's listen into what the Prime Minister said on this aspect.
भारत और रूस ने लंबे समय से कंधा मिलाकर सहयोग किया है। पहलगाम में हुआ आतंकी हमला हो या क्रोकस सिटी हॉल पर किया गया कायरतापूर्ण आघात, इन सभी घटनाओं की जड़ एक ही है। भारत का अटल विश्वास है कि आतंकवाद मानवता के मूल्यों पर सीधा प्रहार है और इसके विरुद्ध वैश्विक एकता ही हमारी सबसे बड़ी ताकत है। भारत और रूस के बीच यूएन, G20, ब्रिक्स, एससीओ तथा अन्य मंचों पर करीबी सहयोग रहा है। करीबी तालमेल के साथ आगे बढ़ते हुए हम इन सभी मंचों पर अपना संवाद और सहयोग जारी रखेंगे।
When both leaders of this stature speak of tackling terrorism decisively, do you see this tackling into, say, deeper collaboration in areas like, say, counter-terror technology, intelligence sharing, or joint military training? That's something that has already taken place, but given the changing nature of warfare and the threat perception in the wake of India-Pakistan conflict that happened during the Operation Sindoor, how do you see this relationship now transcending to newer levels?
There's no doubt about it. Global terror may have seen some element of dilution, but terror is always lurking around the corner. As you have seen in the recent Delhi blasts, what has happened here. You are always thinking that you have overcome the issues, and that's when it all comes back. One of the most important things in counterterrorism is preparedness, joint cooperation, and particularly in the field of intelligence and in the field of ISR, which means that technologies have to be exploited. In today's world, it's all technical issues concerning terrorism. Russia has had tremendous experience in this. They've had problems in Chechnya, they've had problems in Dagestan, they've always kept a very close scrutiny and surveillance over Central Asia, which they know is their soft underbelly. That's also a great area of interest for India. So behind the scenes, while there may be lots and lots of things up front, in terms of defense cooperation, in terms of manufacturing and equipment and things like that, there has been a lot of quiet cooperation which has been going on between India and Russia. And I'm glad that both our leaders have chosen to reinforce this whole thing, recognizing the fact that terror does not just disappear. It comes back in some form or the other. And you're seeing more technicalization of global terror at the moment, and that will be something which can jointly hit both of us at any time.
In fact, a related question to you, Professor Sachdeva, on the aspect of technology and strategic cooperation. There's a second half in the joint statement which says both sides need to ramp up government, academia and private sector collaboration in critical and emerging technologies. They've highlighted cooperation going forth in critical minerals and rare earths. How decisive is this shift between both countries' relationship in building long-term tech interdependence? Because we've spoken about the traditional historical areas in which we've had very crucial partnerships. But given the changing dynamics, rare earth minerals, critical minerals hold the key to every sector and its development that you talk about. So this kind of tech interdependence, how do you see that building up between both countries?
Well, Russia has, solid base of basic sciences. There were certain disturbances in the past, but I think, we are of course looking towards United States and Europe for some of our technologies. But some of the cutting edge technologies, even in the artificial intelligence and also in quantum and in critical minerals and many other areas, Russians are, even the cybersecurity, I think they are very good. Now, in the last few years, as I think 20, 30, 40,000 people have already gone working there, and this mobility agreement will facilitate high-skilled people, semi-skilled people, and Russia, the kind of demography they have for the decades, they will need more and more people. And many of the people, those who are earlier coming from Central Asian republics, I think some of them have gone back in the last few years, and the Chinese also, in fact, not really going in that numbers to Russia. So there is a very good scope for India and Russia to work, and this will be beneficial for both of us.
potential that needs to be tapped into, about which both leaders spoke about. We're hopeful that in the times to come, this roadmap will be followed, and in the next few years, there will be a growing trajectory in the India-Russia partnership that has by far grown strength by strength. And now, after the 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit, with the kind of diversification in cooperation in newer sectors, about which both our guests have also spoken about, will add newer avenues to this cooperation in the times to come. Time allows us to take up only that much of the program, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us with your valuable insights. That's it from us on this telecast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit. The participants were Veena Sikri, former diplomat, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, defense analyst, and Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, international affairs expert. Moderator was Tina Jha, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.
Current affairs.